Okay, the content of what I want to present to you today in this part 3 is technically not content on perception per se, but some of the feedback I've been getting from rereading some of the intro stuff at the beginning, reading a few journal entries from when I was over spring break, I read a few journal entries from the past units, is that some people would like a little more philosophical content as well to the TOK course. It's not technically a philosophy course, but it does for sure touch on a lot of philosophical concepts. Some of the stuff in today's presentation is more of a philosophy concept, but as well it's got some interesting statistics that I'm bringing, I like to bring to TOK classes because TOK is about questioning, right? And you guys having been students now for at least 11 years, and for those being in the IB program in general, you're obviously looking for higher learning beyond high school, stuff that you can get beyond public school system. Asking questions is going to definitely be a big part of that. If you can't kind of come up with a way to think about the way questioning works, you're losing out on the chance to draw in new information. So some of what I want to present to you guys today is about questions. Things which do not seem the same to those who love and those who hate, nor to those who are angry and those who are calm. Okay? So let's talk about the art of asking questions. And I think you should use this to analyze your teachers as well. Okay, I'm going to ask you this question. What percentage of questions versus statements are made on average by your teachers? Now here's what I mean. In an average class, in terms of when they just make a statement, like, you know, X plus Y equals Z, versus whether they ask you a question, what's the percentage? In other words, what percentage of stuff that a teacher says is questions? What would you guess? Out of between 1 and 100, or 0 and 100, on average? 8? You think it's low, right? That more like 92% of what they say are statements and not questions, right? It's 30, okay? What educational experts say, what do they say, if the people who have studied this, what do they say is a better number, the optimal number? 50, you think? Right? Like what would they say would they say that's too low or would they say that's too high? You guys thought it was lower, right? So it's actually higher than you think. On average, now certainly there are teachers who might be at 0%, but on average it's around 30. But what would you say the experts say is the proper amount? You're probably guessing it's higher, right? Because the fact that I'm leading into this, it seems like it should be higher. And it is. It's 60%. About a third of the class, they say, should be questioning you guys. Okay? I can't say I'm at that level. I don't think I am. I don't think I'm at a 60% questioning level. I don't know if I agree with 60%. I don't know if that's the right way to go. I think it depends on the course and the content and stuff like that. I think for sure I ask way more questions in TOK. Maybe I should put it this way. Do I ask more questions in TOK than I do in, say, some of the other courses I teach? But I want to present a guide. This isn't my guide. I've researched this, and this is a guide for how to ask questions, sort of a way to ask them to get clarity and understanding. And it's kind of also something you can use not just to a person, but a way you ask questions when you do research to help with things like essay writing. Okay, so 1, you should try to understand what the speaker's position is, right? So let's say you were attending a presentation. We had that blood donor one yesterday, right? So when those 2 people came and gave that blood donor presentation, you should try to understand what their position is. Obviously, I'm guessing they were pro-donating blood, right? So you kind of had a grasp on their position there, okay? Second thing is, and this is very often something that my own daughter can be guilty of, is there were words that were said that she didn't understand, and she just let it go. Well, right away then, you're in a bad spot. If you don't understand the words that are being said, especially if they're central to the position, if they're really important, you need to know what those words are. So, whoa, stop right there. What do you mean by that? Right? Is a very important thing to be clear about when you're asking questions is definitions about what the words mean. Okay? Now we're going to dig a little bit deeper. Now you might understand the vocabulary going on, but what are the assumptions on this argument? Again, this might be a question that you ask, but you might be sort of wondering, like, with the blood donor presentation yesterday, what was the underlying assumption was that you guys were probably going to, the assumption was that they were trying to influence you to give blood, right? We assumed that. We didn't assume that they came in here to try and sell us something. We had this assumption that they had, for example, good motives and things like that. There were some assumptions that we were basing the sort of general idea on. So you kind of grasp those. So again, you can kind of break these down into simple things. What's their position? What are the words mean? And what are the assumptions in place here? Okay? And then watch out for stats. Like I just threw up stats. I threw up that 30%, 60% stuff. Are those stats misleading? Stats are very often used by people to try and make a point. Sometimes they'll present a graph. Sometimes they'll just throw out a number. Sometimes they'll just say, does everyone in here agree? That's a statistic, right? That's kind of a simple thing that's just trying to be, but is it actually, the stat actually saying what it is they're saying, right? Is it actually giving the correct answer? And are their conclusions supported by opinion or evidence? So in the end, they're going to conclude to you something. Is that conclusion just an opinion of theirs, or do they actually have evidence to back up what they just concluded? These are really 5 analytical ways to really understand what questions you should be asking when you analyze something. Whether it's someone presenting content to you, like a teacher in a classroom, or those people doing the blood donor, or if you're researching something online, or if you're doing a paper. Those are 5 very basic fundamentals of what you should be doing when you ask a question, when you're questioning your content. And then the 6th one, I think, kind of relates to the 5th one. Are the conclusions logical and consistent? If we look back to our reason unit, you could use things like logical syllogisms and things like that to kind of build that sort of foundation on whether this is actually, is there fallacies there? So these ones kind of lead into the content we'll be looking at before. Is there a consistency and a structure to the argument? Is it fallacious? Okay. Is there bias in place? Okay. A big thing in things like the sciences. What are the implications of what they're saying? And what's the opposite view here? Should I even take a look at this? Should the opposite view be something I should be considering here? Right? What's the downside to giving blood? What's the opposite opinion here? Is there anyone out there who opposes the giving of blood? And if so, should I actually just at least listen to their opinion just so I can analyze it in the context of where I'm kind of at? Okay, those are 9 simple things. I really like to focus on the first 5. I think those are the more important ones. But I think, again, it's just something to step back and analyze. Because here you guys are in a class that's supposed to be about asking questions. And so I think it's important to really step back and sort of think about the types of questions you're asking. Okay. Let me just back up to that quote. The greatest thing a human soul ever does is to see something and tell what it saw in a plain way. To see clearly is poetry, prophecy, and religion all in one. Okay? Getting a little more on, I kind of want to put something in there that's fairly philosophical to lead into the great philosopher Socrates. Okay? Socrates came up with a way to ask questions in a specific structured way that he called the Socratic Seminar. So I actually want to present this to you guys today, and normally we then do a Socratic Seminar after that, but I think we're going to, for time, omit that today. But I want to go over the structure of this. It's possible, if you take philosophy beyond high school, or something philosophical, you might encounter the Socratic Seminar again. So 2,400 years ago, Socrates walked through the streets of Athens, and he was followed by a bunch of people who wanted to learn from him, his students, right? And they kind of wanted to become philosopher like Socrates. So it was through Socrates' dialogue and with his students that he would ask questions of his students rather than make statements. So he was a big proponent of that as well. And he taught them how to question, how to use the power of inquiry to teach themselves how to learn content. So rather than him be a lecturer, he liked his students to ask him questions and do it in a way that would help them to learn. Okay? So he was the opposite of what we said before. He wasn't a person asking 8% of his content as questions. He was someone in the 90s with his questions. But he wanted to teach them how to ask those questions so that they wouldn't like ask stupid, embarrassing questions, but that their questions actually led to deep content. So he allowed their opinions to be synthesized and connect their opinions and their beliefs and stuff like that through this fashion known as the Socratic Seminar. Okay? So what he would do is he would gather about 10 to 25 of his students together. He would have a passage that they were going to discuss, very often written down. It was on a piece of text, okay? And he would basically allow open-ended dialogue-based questions. Now, what the topic was irrelevant. It was the format in which he did it. So the subject matter could be anything. The questions are meant to ask deeper understanding. So you have to start with the basic text that you read. And it was only through practice that the students learned how to ask the right types of questions to really dig deep into the content and challenge each other as they asked the questions. Okay, so one of the things they would do is a lot of the students would be asked to ask clarification questions, which would be things like, what did you mean by blank, right? Rather than jump to things by saying, well, what you just said means this. So they weren't allowed to make conclusions. They were only allowed to ask questions that were clarification type questions like, well, did you mean this when you said that, right? So they were kind of trying to clarify what was being said rather than throwing out an opinion or some sort of conclusion. So part of working in a Socratic seminar is you have to be a very active listener. To actually participate in these things, and again, it's tricky unless you actually participate in them. You have to actually listen because they're often turn-based, right? So if we were doing a run right now and you guys were in a sort of a circle, I would start by, we'd all read this piece of text, and then I'd go, what do you think it means on line whatever when he says this? And then you would say, well, actually, I'm wondering what's going on this line, and your question should be directly related to mine. So in order for you to do that, you'd have to actually be listening to me at the time. And everyone knows what's coming, right? So your turn is coming. You have to be listening to the person before you so that when it's your turn, you can respond to what they said with another deeper question, okay? So it requires you to really listen. Otherwise, you look silly because you're out of turn. Right? So you have to listen and you have to respond with a question about what they just said in terms of clarification. And what it ends up doing is it creates a very deep dig into what you're actually analyzing. Okay? There's a lot of other things that goes into a Socratic seminar. Everyone is treated as equals, right? Which is not the case in your typical classroom. Teacher holds a different power level than you guys do, right? So you guys don't feel like you're having a conversation at the same level. And I understand that. So with Socrates, he wanted his students to think he was at that same level. So there's that. There's a mutual respect that you should try to have with a Socratic seminar. You're not out there to embarrass anyone. It's a respect thing. So by doing this kind of seminar, the Socratic seminar, it really makes for a really deep but highly structured discussion. Okay, Socratic seminar is not question-answer session where someone's the expert and just answers all the questions. No one's answering the questions. You're continually generating questions, okay? It's not like showing off what you know. That's not what a Socratic seminar is. Again, it's digging deeper. It's by asking questions, you're actually digging deeper into the content. It's not a competition. It's not a debate where you try and show off how smart you are. A Socratic seminar is supposed to be something that's very, very equal. So it is a practice in reading, thinking, listening, and speaking. It is a search for digging deeper into content. It is an open-ended discussion forum that is about questioning. It's where everyone's equals and that no one should be embarrassed by their opinion. It is very difficult to do a good job at. It takes practice, okay? But if you take philosophy classes, you may certainly encounter Socratic seminars in the future, and they are uniquely interesting if you can get one working really well. Maybe I will just show you sort of the structure of it today. Okay, here's a way to kind of look at it, a difference between a debate and a dialogue, right? In a debate, it's a competition, right? So you have a goal to prove somebody else wrong. So you have an opponent. You are listening in the debate for things that they said wrong. So you are intentionally listening to try and catch them. You will defend your position. You say, well, this is what I'm assuming. You are not open to their side. I'm going to win. Their side is wrong. I'm not even going to listen to them, other than listening for mistakes they might make. And I will defend what I believe wholeheartedly, all out. I will look for weaknesses, listening for flaws, and I will demand that I get the kind of the last word on this. That's a debate. A dialogue, which is more of the Socratic Seminar model, is more of a collaborative model, right? The goal is not to beat the other side. The goal is everybody is at the same level. Everybody understands. So when you listen, you're listening for important things to share with the group to try and come up with a deeper meaning. You are constantly reevaluating what you're assuming and what you're guessing. So you're listening intentionally to go, that's a good point. Or, wow, I've never thought of that kind of thing before. You are intentionally looking to say things like that so that you can open up the dialogue. So, of course, you're going to be open-minded. Okay? Now, in TOK, I like both of these things. Right? I like the idea of defending yourself in debate, both in the spoken word through a formal debate structure and in the written word. When you write an essay, you're often defending a position. But I also like the idea of the dialogue taking place. This, to me, is what I'd like a TOK class to be. This, to me, is what I'd like a TOK essay to be in some ways. I'm kind of oversimplifying that and stuff. But both of those are valuable things. I'm not saying one is better than the other. Well, I guess I am, in the certain context of which one you're using it for. Okay, but it's important to know which kind of mindset you're in when you're engaging in a certain activity. Do you want it to be a debate? Do you want it to be a dialogue? Okay, there's 3 simple rules of the Socratic Seminar. Listen, okay? It's a listening activity. Listen to what other people are saying, okay? So that you pick up on what somebody else said with your own statement, okay? Build. Don't tear down what they say. Build up what they say. Say, that's a great point. I never thought of that before. And you know what? What you just said can mean blah, blah, blah. You build up from what they said. Don't tear it down by saying, well, what you said was nonsense. Let me tell you the real way we should interpret this, right? So if you keep that in mind, that you're listening and you're building off other people's statements. And then finally, you need some sort of centralized position. So there's often a piece of text that you refer to that's sort of the central position that you're on, right? That text can be very small, like just a topic, or it can be like a paragraph or a page that you're using as sort of the beginning for this. Okay, so that's the Socratic Seminar. Does it have much to do with perception? Not so much. But it is, I think, a very crucial part of study in TOK.